Good morning. Today's July 23rd. We're here for Blue Cross Blue Shield's rate review hearing. I'm going to designate Mike Barber as the hearing officer for today. I understand Mr. Barber's communicated that the board has a significant volume of questions and we may need additional time, and I appreciate the parties working with us to accommodate that. I do think and feel that this is one of the most consequential and important decisions the board has had before it since I've been here. These are extraordinary rate requests on extraordinary base prices. And I think the consequences here of approving the rates, denying the rates, or anything in between is anywhere in that range is concerning to me. And I want to make sure that the board has all the information it needs to make the best decision possible in this very, very, very tough environment. The board has reviewed all the materials many times over. And so I think for purposes of direct and cross by the parties, there's really no need to repeat pre-filed testimony or anything like that. I think it'd be more valuable to get right into the meat of the issues. And you can presume we're quite familiar with the record, but nonetheless. All right, so thank you. I'll turn it to Mr. Barber. Yeah, you're muted, Mike.
Thanks. As the chair said, this is a hearing to take evidence and argument on Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Vermont's 2026 individual and small group rate filings. The docket number for the individual filing is GMCB-004-25RR, and the docket number for the small group filing is GMCB-005-25RR. This hearing is being held pursuant to 8 VSA Section 4062, as well as Section 2.307 of the Green Mountain Care Board's rate review rule. I'll just skip some of the other material we don't need to cover. A reminder: if anyone has technical difficulties today, as we go through this, please. You can text me and I'll pause the hearing while we try to get it sorted out. My cell phone number is 802-585-4829. For members of the public who might be here this morning, we will be taking public comment at the close of the proceedings today, but we also have a meeting tomorrow, July 24th, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock that will be dedicated exclusively to hearing public comment on both Blue Cross's rate filings and the rate filings from MVP. And I'd strongly suggest that if you have public comment that you take advantage of that meeting, because we're pressed for time today, as the chair said. So real quickly, exhibit binders. We received revised binders on July 21st. Those revised binders contain 32 exhibits. I do just want to note for the board members, however, that Exhibit 28 is a list of 9 healthcare advocate exhibits. Those exhibits, it's my understanding, they're not included in the binders, but they contain that exhibit contains website addresses that link to the documents. So we just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And I understand the parties have stipulated to the admissibility of all the documents in the binder. Is that accurate, Charlie and Michael?
That is accurate. Yep.
Okay, then I will go ahead and admit those at this point. Just a reminder for everybody that the binders contain confidential information. The documents with confidential information are identified in the table of contents. The material that has been determined to be confidential in Blue Cross's case is typically highlighted in blue, although there may be entire pages that are marked with, entire page confidential or something to that effect. So please just be aware of that as you move through your questions. We do have have tentatively planned for two kind of non-public sessions to allow you time to ask questions about the confidential material. So currently, the order of witnesses is Ruth Green, Commissioner Sampson from DFR. Then I was thinking we would have an opportunity for a non-public session to ask questions about confidential material at that point, and then after Andrew Garland, I think a lot of his testimony would need to be in a non-public session, and so we'd have one there. So that's the tentative plan. We can talk about that as we get into things. So does either party have anything else we need to discuss before we move to opening statements?
Not for Blue Cross, thank you.
And not for the HCA either.
Okay. So would Blue Cross like to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Good morning, Chair Foster and board members Holmes, Merman, and Walsh. Good morning, Mr. Becker and the rest of the HCA team. My name is Mike D'Onofrio. I'm here again representing Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. With me today are my colleagues from our law firm, Strisson Maher, Bridget Acey, and Sebastian Delgado. And a number of Blue Cross folks are also in the virtual room with us. I see Don George, Rebecca Heinz, Ruth Green, Martine Brisson-Lemieux, Benjamin Nelson, Greg Bulbul, and I imagine others will sort of join us as the day goes on. So as Chair Foster noted, and it seems like we note this to each other every year, we're faced with another extraordinary challenge this year. And in my opening the last couple of years, which I went back and reread, I started off on a pretty gloomy note, and it's been and still is a very challenging time for Vermont's healthcare system. Underlying costs are still growing too fast, and they're pulling insurance premiums up with them. And that makes it even harder for Vermonters who are already strapped, and the small businesses as well in this market, to afford insurance coverage. And of course, as you know, Blue Cross's reserves remain in a risky position, and that kind of takes the reserves off the table to function as a shock absorber. All that said, though, I do want to try to sound at least a small note of optimism and note some meaningful accomplishments that have happened since last year's rate review. First and foremost, this board sounded an alarm bell that I think the whole system really needed to hear last fall. Your hospital budget orders began with this, every one of them began with this simple clarion call, and I quote, "Vermont is confronting a healthcare affordability crisis." Sort of building off that, call to arms, the board, the state, the various, state agencies involved, the HCA, Blue Cross, and the other key stakeholders in our healthcare system listened, and earlier this year began to work together in good faith and with open minds to try to identify and develop solutions that might bend the cost curve in time to affect these rates that you're reviewing today. That in and of itself is an extraordinary accomplishment. And we hope that that momentum will continue indefinitely. And, Blue Cross is here for it for the duration. And then third, and maybe most importantly, and certainly most tangibly, those efforts bore fruit in the form of Act 55, which limits the pricing of certain drugs sold at Vermont hospitals. And that resulted from that collective effort that I described. And it has allowed Blue Cross to trim about 4% off these rates since filing them. And that's going to save our members in these markets about $20 million in 2026. And Blue Cross was able to do that because Act 55 results in a measurable, bankable set of savings in an identifiable driver of underlying healthcare costs. So Blue Cross looks at that as a model for the future to continue to work together, continue to identify solutions that we can bank on and build into future rate processes. Now, turning to this year's proceeding, As the chair noted, there's a robust documentary record, and it amply supports approving the rates as requested, subject to Lewis and Ellis's adjustments, and of course, subject to the outcomes of your hospital budget review process. The filings themselves lay out the case, the actuarial analysis behind the rates, the rationale for the requested 7% contribution to reserve, and in attachment D, Blue Cross's many efforts to use the relatively limited tools at a payer's disposal to try to bend the cost curve and make the rates as affordable as possible. The written responses to the more than 50 questions that we've received from the board and from Lewis and Ellis and from the HCA also kind of augment the record and support the requested rates. And finally, the pre-filed testimony that we submitted lends further support. And with the chair's note at the beginning in mind, we will try to be as efficient as we possibly can in the direct examinations and kind of allow, set the stage and allow the board members to ask our witnesses the questions you need to ask. And speaking of witnesses, here's a bit of a roadmap for the testimony. Ruth Green will lead off, Blue Cross's treasurer and chief financial officer. She will discuss the company's financial situation, the challenges it still faces, the delicate status of its member reserves and solvency, and the paramount need for fully funded rates this year. She'll be followed by Commissioner Sampson from DFR. And as you're well aware, the department included new language in its solvency opinion this year. I'll just quote the first sentence. As with any rate filing, there may be events or favorable strategies identified that occur or are expected to occur subsequent to the filing date. Continuing a little further down, given the company's current financial position, there is no remaining margin on Blue Cross's balance sheet to absorb additional uncertainty in these rates. That sort of ties back to the Act 55 example of, we refer to it as a bankable set of savings that we were able to incorporate into these rates. That's what's required in order to reduce the requested rates consistent with the board's duty to maintain solvency and all the other statutory criteria. Moving on through the witnesses, next will be Martine Brisson-Lemieux, Blue Cross's chief actuary. As in past years, she'll cover the actuarial analysis that supports the requested rates. She'll be followed by Kevin Ruggeberg from Lewis and Ellis, the board's actuary. And together, their testimony will show near complete agreement. There's a small disparity regarding trend assumptions for pharmaceuticals and for mental health and substance use disorder. But otherwise, all of the actuaries who have looked at the filings agree that the requested rates should be approved as modified by L&E. And the actuaries agree on one very critical point this year, the need to avoid double counting the Act 55 savings in the hospital budget process. And L&E just issued, I think on Monday, its reports on Blue Cross's AHP and large group filings and reiterated that point there. Blue Cross's final witness will be Andrew Garland. He's vice president for client relations and external affairs. He will testify about Blue Cross's efforts to make the rates as affordable as possible, as laid out in attachment D to the filing, as well as Blue Cross's provider negotiations. The healthcare advocate Michael Fisher will round out the day's testimony, providing perspective on behalf of Vermont's consumers. So with that roadmap in mind, we ask that to the extent possible, the HCA and board members direct your questions to sort of the person who has jurisdiction over that topic. And our witnesses will also try to help if there's any crossover in that way and sort of point in the right direction. And as always, we're happy to provide written follow-up to any questions that would be more efficient to handle that way than during today's hearing. We know there's a lot of ground to cover. So to sum up, The evidence currently in the record, which will be augmented by today's testimony, amply supports approving the rates as requested and as modified by L&E, subject to the outcome of your hospital budget review process. Given the realities of growing healthcare costs, Blue Cross's tenuous reserve position, it would be improper to order any reduction that's not actuarially justified or that's not tied directly to a bankable cost savings like the savings generated by Act 55. So with that, on behalf of the entire Blue Cross team and my colleagues, Bridget and Sebastian, I thank the chair, I thank the board members, I thank Hearing Officer Barber and the entire Green Mountain Care Board staff. I thank Mr. Becker and Mr. Fisher and Mr. Schulteis at the HCA for your hard work, your patience, and your collegiality through what's been another arduous rate review process. We look forward to the conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Becker?
Yes, thank you, Hearing Officer Barber. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Becker. I'm a staff attorney with the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, appearing on behalf of Vermonters who use health insurance. It feels like it has been a very long run-up to this rate review hearing. While ordinarily a rate review season runs May to early August, this one feels like it began at the latest last December when the words claims surge first began circulating and word started leaking out that Blue Cross of Vermont was in serious trouble. Like if we had all thought they were in trouble last summer, coming in with rate hikes over 20%, including a once unthinkable 7% CTR request. Well, now they were really in trouble, hemorrhaging millions of dollars in reserves a month and an RBC that was getting very low. Just how low? Well, now we know and can say it got as low as 104% and was only propped back up by a $30 million rescue loan from their parent affiliate, Blue Cross of Michigan. As lawmakers began the legislative session in January, many of them newly elected, they were greeted by whispers of Blue Cross's possible insolvency. Indeed, the very real prospect that Vermont's only homegrown insurer might actually fail, and what that failure might mean for Blue Cross's customers whose claims would not be paid, and the ripple effect Blue Cross Vermont's insolvency would have on Vermont's already badly broken healthcare system and on the lives of Vermonters who depend on it. And so while it hardly ever seemed to be spoken of out loud, much of the legislature's focus, at least in the healthcare committees, was spent on how to deal with this crisis. And so we got H266, which caps reimbursement for outpatient administered drugs, and we got S126, which will bring us reference-based pricing and global budgets, and H482, which gives the board emergency powers to set hospital prices when a state-domiciled health insurer is at risk of insolvency. And those were all really important and impactful pieces of legislation. But would they be too little, too late for Blue Cross Vermont? Then, as the first year of the biennium was drawing to an end in May, the health insurance rates came out. It had been a question even, would they or wouldn't they? Would Blue Cross even file rates for the QHPs? But they did. And to no one's surprise, the rate requests were really high. Again, 23.5% individual and 13.7% small group. So then it seemed that there was this really massive push. The goal was set, no more than a 5% rate hike, and we're going to find $200 million and $400 million in savings to do it. Work groups were convened, 5 of them at least, and all the stakeholders were there, and Blue Cross and the Health Network held negotiations. Were they good faith negotiations? We can only hope so and assume so. And all of this was playing out against a backdrop of changes at the federal level that were more far-reaching and devastating than many people had anticipated. And so now here we are, July 23rd, 2025, the Blue Cross individual and small group rate hearings, finally. And I'll be honest, I'm having a hard time coming into today even knowing what the rates are. But I do know they're not 5%. I'm also struggling with the right tone to bring to these proceedings today on behalf of Vermonters. Reading through the comments, it's clear, as you would expect, Vermonters are fed up with high prices. They're disappointed that we are in this situation of having a health insurer on the brink of insolvency, and seemingly they are disillusioned that people in positions of power can or will do anything about it. They're disheartened that they might ever see any relief, and they're right to feel that way. Vermonters deserve better than this. They deserve better than double-digit rate increases year after year, rate hikes that are not even enough to keep Vermont's sole home state insurer solvent, given the extraordinarily high cost of care. That is, if you can even get an appointment to access the care or afford your cost sharing when you do. Vermonters deserve better than being forced to hand over 7% of premiums each year for who knows how many more years in order to rebuild Blue Cross's depleted reserves and to pay back Michigan. I'll end with an observation that yes, Blue Cross lost small group members last year, but they gained in the individual market, overall showing remarkable resilience given the company's high premium prices and the availability of at least one lower cost option. And so from that, you can conclude Vermonters are loyal to this company. They want it to succeed. Indeed, they need it to succeed, and they're willing to stick by it. And so for that loyalty, again, they deserve better. And I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Blue Cross's first witness is Miss Green, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Hearing Officer Barber. And good morning, Chair,
Morning.
Chair Foster,
Miss
and
Green,
Board Member Holmes.
Sorry. Miss Green, I'm going to swear you in now. Could you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Miss AC, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hearing Officer Barber, are you able to hear me?
I can, yes.
Thank you. Would you please state your full name again for the record?
Ruth Green.
Ms. Green, what is your position with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont?
I hold the position of Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Did you submit pre-filed testimony in this proceeding?
I did, yes.
Would you please identify that by exhibit number in the binder?
My pre-filed testimony is at Exhibit 23 in the binder.
Is the testimony contained in exhibit 23 true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Ms. Green, what is your assessment of Blue Cross's current financial position?
Our financial position remains challenging. Our reserves remain dangerously low. Blue Cross is doing everything it can to turn that around. Many stakeholders in the Vermont healthcare system, including the board, are also working hard to address the healthcare cost issues in Vermont and address persistent structural concerns. But the risk of insolvency remains real. At the end of 2024, our member reserves were equivalent to about 15 days of insured claims payments. And even if you add in the surplus loan, you can double that to 30 days, but that is dangerously low. We simply cannot sustain any losses on the order of what we experienced in 2022, 2023, and 2024.
We will get back to each of those points this morning, but let's start with your reference to the work that the board and other stakeholders have been doing to reduce healthcare costs. Would you please say a little more about that?
Yes. First, I'd like to express our appreciation for the work of the board and other stakeholders, including DFR, the HCA, the legislature, and the administration, to take concrete steps to reduce healthcare costs in Vermont. As mentioned already, a great example of that is H266, now Act 55, which capped certain drug prices. And because we can clearly see how that will be implemented and how the impact on 2026 healthcare costs will unfold, we've been able to estimate those savings and reduce the premiums for 2026, which reduced the small group premium increase to single digits and also made a significant impact to reduce the individual rate increase. And that's benefiting our members and customers in a real immediate way. As we observe every year at this hearing, insured premiums reflect the cost of healthcare for our members, and it's critical for Vermonters to continue to work to focus on slowing the growth of healthcare costs.
As Blue Cross Vermont's treasurer and chief financial officer, what are your concerns about participating in the QHP markets this year?
I have three primary concerns. First, our QHP rates must include 7% CTR to ensure that we can begin to rebuild the reserves and recover from the precarious financial position. Our financial regulator, DFR, in their solvency opinion, advised the board that 7% CTR is critical and vigorously recommended by DFR, and I wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. The second concern I have is really having to do with the estimates and the increased degree of inherent risk in determining rates for 2026. There's been regulatory changes that we've estimated the impacts for, but those estimates could be wrong. And so as we move into 2026, it'll be important that the estimates for the Act 55 savings pan out the way we expected, and also the estimates for, the actuaries have done their level best to estimate the impact of the enhanced subsidies going away at the federal level, but those estimates could be wrong. So with the increased number of changes and estimates, if we underestimate the claims for 2026, again, it will certainly eat into any contribution to reserve and possibly lead to losses, and we simply don't have any cushion left for that. Third, although we understand the pressure to lower premiums, I am concerned about any attempt to reduce the filed rates for what I'll describe as aspirational hopes for reducing costs next year. DFR advises extreme caution against that approach, and L&E also indicated that there were no adjustments for anything that's not been enacted at this point. So all of these concerns really just relate to the fact that our financial position is very compromised. Our reserves are depleted, and we have to avoid any further losses. But we also need to add to reserves urgently so that we can fulfill our role as protecting our members in the case of unexpected changes in the economic environment.
Let's turn then to discussing solvency concerns. How would you describe Blue Cross's financial position and outlook at the end of 2024?
Blue Cross's financial position at the end of 2024 was approaching insolvency.
How so?
Without the benefit of the surplus loan, both our risk-based capital, or RBC, and member reserves were below what's called the regulatory action level, and that's the level at which DFR would have to come in and take some action.
Can you briefly share some of the key events that led up to this?
We had booked substantial losses in 2022 and 2023, and the member reserves and RBC had been reduced such that the RBC was at 337 as we entered 2024. And that is well below the required range for our reserves. Then in 2024, we booked another significant loss, and the extremely low level of reserves as the year developed, we were able to obtain access to a surplus loan, and that gave us critical protection in the case that we dropped as low as we did at the end of the year. And in fact, we had to draw on that loan in order to stay above 200% RBC. We also increased our CTR in the insured premiums for all of our market segments, and we increased it from 3% to 7%. And we continue to confer with DFR, our solvency regulator, about our plan to increase RBC levels.
Hearing Officer Barber, just to provide a preview for the board and HCA Council, Ms. Green will testify in the public session regarding reserves and RBC position for year-end 2024, and consistent with the board's confidentiality rulings on our filings, we will reserve discussion of interim RBC calculations and specifics of the confidential recovery plan for an executive session. Ms. Green, what was Blue Cross Vermont's RBC position at the end of 2024 with and without the surplus note?
Blue Cross's RBC position was 104 without the benefit of the surplus loan. Including that loan, it was 214. That loan is essentially a loan from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan with special terms, including terms such that DFR approval is required before any interest or principal is repaid.
How much did Blue Cross hold in reserves at the end of 2024?
At the end of 2024, we had 28.4 million of our own reserves remaining, and because of the $30 million surplus loan, that was another $30 million for a total of 58.4 million.
What caused the losses in 2024?
Healthcare costs for our members began to surge unexpectedly in the first part of 2024, and then at the end of 2024, there was another increase that was significantly above the levels that we had assumed in our premiums.
Did you provide details about that claim surge in your pre-file testimony?
Yes.
Is there anything you want to highlight for the board from that testimony?
Yes, despite the high premium increases in 2023 and 2024 as a result of higher claims in 22 and 2023, the graph on page 13 shows how the per member per month claims increased in March and April of 24, and then again significantly in September, October, and November, well above expectations. These increases were substantial, and they weren't reflected in our rates.
Ms. Green, you testified both here and in your pre-filed testimony that Blue Cross Vermont is requesting a 7% contribution to reserves for these markets. Why is a 7% CTR required to be included in the 2026 premiums?
A 7% CTR is required because it's the central component of our RBC recovery plan. It's essential for the RBC recovery to have a contribution to reserve to rebuild those reserves. And it's the 7% CTR is the most critical component of our financial recovery plan. We need to continue at that level of CTR until we can see that premiums are sufficiently covering the costs of healthcare for our members, plus adding to CTR. Importantly, we're not yet observing that premium adequacy. If you look at our year-to-date results for 2025, we're tracking to a CTR of 4%. What that means is we're realizing a 4% CTR because other assumptions we made in 2025's premiums, the costs that those premiums cover are higher, even higher than what we had expected when we set those premiums and when the board approved them. In 2025, the second half could change that picture quickly. As we know, the seasonality of our business is driven by the benefit designs. And as we saw last year, claims really spiked in the second half of the year. And so it really will be important to see how the whole full year 2025 results pan out before we understand if the premiums for 2025 even were adequate. In order for rates to be fully funded, we really need to see that key measure of the premium and claims, the relationship. We need to see that the priced CTR, the CTR that's included in our rate development, is tracking reasonably close to what we actually realize. In fact, until that happens, our recovery really is not happening.
Ms. Green, excuse me, Ms. Green, can you clarify, please, what you mean when you say that the rates should be fully funded?
For rates to be fully funded, we need all of the components of the rates to be adequately funded. And if the board reduces any components of the rates, those reductions effectively reduce our expectations for CTR.
Are there other reasons that justify a 7% CTR in these markets specifically?
Yes, these markets drive a disproportionate share of our member reserve requirement, but we haven't realized a CTR in these markets, and thus they haven't contributed to reserves. Since their inception, we have a cumulative loss that's in Exhibit 1 on page 6 that shows the historical experience, and the cumulative loss is $83.2 million in these markets. Those losses, especially acute in recent years because of the increasing claims, have drained our reserves.
You referred to Exhibit 1, page 6, and while we're there, what were the losses in 2022, 23, and 24?
In 2022, 2023, and 2024, losses were over 15 million, 39 million, and 36 million, respectively.
Ms. Green, did you sign attachment D to Blue Cross Vermont's rate filing?
I did.
And
Yes.
does attachment D describe Blue Cross Vermont's programs that are aimed at reducing the cost of healthcare while also promoting quality and access to care?
Yes.
Has Blue Cross been consulting with the Department of Financial Regulation regularly during this period of financial challenges?
Absolutely. As our solvency regulator, DFR is always monitoring our RBC and financial position. During 2024, Blue Cross triggered what's called a company action level of RBC, and DFR required us to submit a written plan outlining the actions that we would take to recover and stabilize RBC.
And I just want to flag for the board that that plan has been provided confidentially at Exhibit 17, page 15. In general terms, Ms. Green, and in the public session, what can you say about the main focus of the recovery plan?
As I mentioned earlier, the main component of the recovery plan involves fully funded rates, including a sufficient CTR or contribution to reserve. If we aren't able to achieve that, we will not be able to increase our reserves to even a minimally adequate level.
And again, with respect to aspects of the plan that can be discussed publicly, is there anything else you'd like to highlight for the board?
Yes, I'd like to point out that how few levers we have to protect and increase reserves beyond seeking fully funded rates. For example, since our RBC dropped below 400% 2 years ago, we began to reduce and eliminate any discretionary spending as a way to, contribute to the recovery. But the reality is that that barely moves the needle, and we can't stop processing claims or serving and assisting members or communicating with providers. There's just no way we can reduce our administrative costs enough to sustainably make up a significant amount of reserves. L&E has indicated over the last few years that our administrative costs are low by national standards. So it really is just not something that we're able to do that makes a huge difference. we have to focus on the rates, and we have to cover the healthcare costs, the cost of insurance, and include an adequate CTR.
Ms. Green, have you read DFR solvency letter in this proceeding, which is at exhibits 20 and 21?
Yes.
Do you have any reaction to that letter to share with the board?
Yes, DFR, I'm just gonna go there right now. DFR's letter confirms that Blue Cross continues to face extraordinary circumstances and plays a critical role in Vermont's healthcare system. DFR agrees with us that a 7% CTR is required, and the commissioner, quote, vigorously recommends that the filed contribution to reserve be maintained to prevent further erosion of solvency and put the company on the path of restoring surplus to adequate levels, unquote. That's on page 4 of exhibit 20. Also, as the DFR solvency letter shows, the premiums in these markets have not been sufficient to cover the costs of these benefit plans, and we've experienced negative CTR for years. A negative CTR, in plain English, means that we've been paying for claims out of reserves instead of out of premiums. And as the commissioner notes on page 5, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont's once adequate surplus has effectively served as a subsidy. So as I read the letter, the commissioner's recommendation is unequivocal that 7% CTR is, quote, necessary and critical to restore the company's surplus toward acceptable levels for the protection of policyholders and the Vermont marketplace. This is our solvency regulator, which has the statutory obligation to monitor our RBC and reserves and to take action in the event reserves are not being restored. And it can't be any clearer than that.
Is there anything else you'd like to highlight from the DFR letter?
Yes, on the top of page 5, and in the interest of time, I won't read the whole paragraph, but on the top of page 5, there's a paragraph that starts with what Mr. Donofrio pointed out, that as with any rate filing, there may be events or favorable strategies identified that occur or are expected to occur subsequent to the filing date. In that paragraph, DFR advises extreme caution on reductions of this nature if they have not been quantified by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and submitted as a modification to the filing. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we are confident that the premiums for 2026 are going to cover the claims. We really don't have any room for being wrong on that point. And I believe that the DFR paragraph states that very, very well. And we also know that L&E in their report indicated no adjustments for anything that had not been enacted or implemented. And so it's important that we keep that in mind.
Ms. Green, are you prepared to provide additional testimony and answer questions regarding Blue Cross's interim RBC calculations?
Yes.
Is it appropriate to provide that testimony in a public session?
No.
Why not?
Our interim mid-year RBC calculations are confidential, commercially sensitive information that we make reasonable efforts to maintain the confidentiality of this information, and doing so is important in a competitive market.
And in your pre-filed testimony, you outlined some other actions in addition to the rate request here that Blue Cross is taking as part of the recovery plan. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And those are at pages 6 to 8 of Exhibit 23.
Yes.
Are some of those actions also confidential?
Yes, as we explained in our confidentiality request, the plan itself is confidential, and some of those actions are not public. Disclosing them would disclose confidential, commercially sensitive information that provides business advantage to Blue Cross and is otherwise also protected from disclosure by law. And I can discuss further in executive session if the board has any questions on that.
If the board does not approve fully funded rates with a 7% CTR for 2026, what will that mean for Blue Cross Vermont?
The RBC recovery plan for Blue Cross is completely dependent on the achievement of fully funded rates for our insured premiums. The near-term success we've had in restoring some reserves through one-time items is important, and it helps move us away from insolvency. And it also helps us plan to repay the surplus loan. But it doesn't provide for sustainability and ongoing movement towards a level where Blue Cross can move back into the role of providing a shock absorber for the healthcare system. Sustainable financial health will only be achieved with fully funded premiums consistently year after year. And our recovery and sustained financial health will, once we see that coming through, it will come to the point where we'll have the opportunity to reduce CTR in future years, but only once member reserves have been restored.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Hearing Officer Barber, that concludes Ms. Green's public session testimony, and I'll pass the witness while reserving the ability to provide additional direct testimony in executive session. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the board's benefit, again, I think the plan is to move through the public portion of Ms. Green's testimony and move on to the commissioner's testimony, what he can testify to in public, and then move to a non-public session to cover the interim RBC stuff, the recovery plan, and any other confidential portions of those witnesses' testimony. So, Mr. Becker, do you have questions for Ms. Green?
I do. Hearing Officer Barber, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Green. How are you?
Good, thanks. You?
Good, good. I'm doing well. So I was trying to do a bit of reworking of the material I had while you were testifying, in the spirit of trying to speed things along, and also understanding that the bulk of questions about attachment E should go to Mr. Garland. But if it's okay, your name is at the top of attachment D. Is that accurate? You signed it. So I have just one quick set of questions I wanted to go through about attachment D. Is that okay?
Sure.
And I'll reserve the rest for Mr. Garland. Yeah, okay. So that memo begins in the first two paragraphs. So if you could just quickly flip to Exhibit 5 and orient yourself to the first two paragraphs.
Can you give me the page number? Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Exhibit 5, page 1, page 2, actually, page 2. I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Yep.
I'm
And
there.
okay, thank you. So these first two paragraphs, I won't read them. I won't ask you to read them. They're pertaining to the affordability guidance. And is it fair to say that the message being conveyed there is a sentiment that not favorable to the affordability guidance? Is that fair?
What I would say is that it just states that it clarifies what is included in our assessment of adequate premium rates, and just clarifies that the affordability information is not one of the inputs to the rates.
Okay. Well, maybe I will ask you. Well, I'll just go ahead and read it. It's the first sentence from the second paragraph. Blue Cross has serious concerns about an affordability methodology that has no relationship to the quality, scope, and value of the coverage offered, and it continues to object to this approach, which is not dictated in the statute. Did I read that accurately?
You did.
Okay, all right. Blue Cross is required to provide evidence that its rates are affordable. Is that correct?
In the context of setting premiums that are adequate to cover claims, yes.
And is it fair to say that one of the reasons why we have this new affordability guidance is that we lacked in the past a metric, we meaning this group, the board, we lacked a metric for gauging whether or not rates are affordable for consumers?
I believe that is the reason why the board put the metrics together.
Okay.
Yes.
Did Blue Cross participate in the development of the guidance?
We did, and we gave feedback along the way, yes.
Okay. Have you personally reviewed the affordability templates, which are an exhibit 29 to the binder? You don't need to flip there, but have you reviewed the completed templates?
As part of the review of the entire binder, I did, yes.
Okay, all right. That's all I wanted to ask about attachment D. I do have other questions, but I'll save those for Mr. Garland. I'm gonna just pivot now to some questions about the contribution to reserves in this filing. And most of my questions will be based off your pre-filed testimony. So if you just wanted to flip to exhibit 23, I'm not sure if I'm going to need you to refer to anything, but that's where these questions are coming from. You testified just earlier now quite strongly, and also in your pre-filed testimony, that a 7% CTR is, and this is from your pre-filed, essential to our continued ability to serve Vermonters in these markets. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And I'll say that there is a compelling case for the 7%. We've heard some of it. Blue Cross's reserves at the end of 2024 were shockingly low. Would you agree?
Yes.
And without that surplus note, you testified that Blue Cross's reserves were down to $28.4 million. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And that was down from a recent high in 2021 of $135.8 million. Is that accurate?
That sounds accurate, yes.
Yeah, so a loss of $107.4 million in member reserves in 3 years. Accurate?
Correct.
Okay. And to stave off insolvency, this is well established, $30 million loan from Blue Cross of Michigan, and it was at 8% interest. Is that right?
That's true.
Okay. And so we have the 7% CTR in this year's filing, and I told you I was going to stick with Exhibit 23, but in fact, I see here I want to jump over to Exhibit 18 really quickly. I'm sorry about that. And it would be page 26 of Exhibit 18. Are you familiar with what this exhibit is?
That's the L&E report for,
Yeah.
I believe, the individual filing.
Okay, that's accurate. There's a chart here at the beginning, at the top of page 26, and it shows, I believe, that a 7% CTR is at the 99th percentile for QHP carriers. Were you aware of that?
I believe that was part of last year's reporting, so I was aware that 7% CTR is unusual.
Okay. So that means, yeah, 7% CTR is higher than 99% of what other QHP carriers are requesting. It's extremely high. Is that fair?
It's extremely high. I don't know the financial condition of all of the carriers in that study, and I believe that in that same report, L&E does comment that the assessment of DFR should be taken into account. I do think that the 99 percentile is reflective of our unusual circumstances of having 15 days of claims in reserves at the end of last year.
That's fair, yeah. So it's also well known, and would you agree that Blue Cross has some of the highest QHP premiums in the country, if not the highest?
I am aware that for whatever reason, the way Vermont's market is structured. We have high premiums on a relative basis. There's a lot of reasons why Vermont might be somewhat of an outlier, but certainly some of the recent comparisons does show very much a significant outlier. On the high side, I should say.
So a significant outlier on the high side for premiums, a significant outlier on the high side for CTR. Are these factors in why Blue Cross is opposed to the affordability guidance?
Absolutely not. I think the affordability guidance, we recognize that the board has a tough job, and affordability is something that we all have to take into account. But in order to function as the financial backer, if you will, of the QHP rates, we need to have the financial reserves there to back things up. So, I don't think the affordability, the opinion or thoughts about the affordability guidance has anything to do with the bigger issue of the high cost of healthcare in Vermont.
I have just one more question on this topic, and I'm wondering if you can say in a non-confidential setting, and if you can't, that's fair. Just let me know. But can you say in a non-confidential setting how many more years Vermonters will need to pay 7% extra to rebuild Blue Cross's reserves?
We can say more specifically in a confidential setting, given where I can share more details. But assuming that the premiums for 2025 and also for 2026 turn out to be adequate to contribute to reserves, I see, and I think in one of our responses to the L&E inquiries, we said it would be 2 to 3 years before we get above the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association level of RBC. And at that point, we'd have to be thinking about what is the right trajectory for a CTR. But we can talk more specifically about that in the executive session.
Okay, thank you. Quickly, if you could turn to Exhibit 17. This is Blue Cross's responses to HCA questions, and if you could turn to page 2 of Exhibit 17.
I'm there, yeah.
In question 6, we asked you, and what I will admit was a poorly formed question about the viability of Vermont's insurance market and whether Blue Cross had done any analyses prior to filing QHP rates about whether it was fiduciarily responsible for Blue Cross to do so. I came up with that wording. It was bad. I think in retrospect, what we were getting at in a more businessy way was making a go, no-go decision. In other words, how Blue Cross decided whether it was a go or no-go for the QHP markets in 2026. And, the answer, it appears it was understood what we were getting at. You say in that first paragraph, we are working closely with DFR and carefully and continuously monitoring reserves, claims, and our financial position, all of which informs our position regarding the terms in which we can participate in the QHP markets. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that response a little bit. What conditions might lead Blue Cross to exit the QHP? Is there a red line?
Yeah, whether there's a red line or not, I don't know. But as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we are watching our adequacy of premiums in the current year, and that'll be an important measure. We're also very, very concerned and careful about the assumptions that are made for the 2026 rates. And we want to have high confidence that those rates will be sufficient to both cover the cost of healthcare for our members and sufficiently contribute to reserves so that we can restore that shock absorber. So I think our decision to submit rates is hard as it is to submit another year of high rates, it was based on our assessment of what we felt the estimates would be. And as I mentioned in my testimony earlier, there are some inherent risks in 2026, but we believe in part that one of the reasons why 7% CTR is required is to make sure that we can get through 2026 with adequate rates and a contribution to reserve. And we believe when we submitted the rates that we had confidence that we could do that. So from the serving the market perspective, you know, if there were a scenario where something were to occur where that confidence was significantly eroded, then we'd have to have some conversations with DFR about what that means going into 2026. When we get to executive session, I can also speak about some of the interim RBC calculations and how that is also on a monthly basis playing into our decision making.
Okay, I appreciate that response. And I think you in part answered what was going to be my last question on this section, and then maybe sort of maybe less confident that you had answered it. My last question was going to be, you know, having submitted rates for 2026, does that mean it's definitely a go for Blue Cross Vermont, and that Vermonters can feel confident selecting a Blue Cross QHP product for 2026?
Well, anything that, you know, I can't answer that question definitively until I see the approved rates, but the rates that were submitted, we can say confidently that that was our intent, and we'll do everything possible to make that the case, because we, as you noted earlier, we are very committed to serving Vermonters, and we'll do everything possible to continue doing that.
Thank you. I have just one more quick section of questions, and then and then I'll be done. I'm going to bring you back to Exhibit 23, which is your pre-filed testimony. You know, so I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, and so I'm getting used to the way things work in the pre-filed testimony. A lot of this is boilerplate. It's similar year to year. But some of this boilerplate jumped out at me in a new way this year. And so, for example, Blue Cross's mission, which is on page 3 of the exhibit, I'll just read one little snippet of it. Outstanding member experiences and responsible cost management. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And so it's the responsible cost management part that stood out to me this year, and I had to think about, you know, why was that? And it was the recent large group decision is why that language stood out to me in a new way. Did you read the recent, I believe it was issued in June, the large group decision?
The large group rate decision from the Green Mountain Care Board.
Correct, for
Yes.
the Blue Cross 2026 large group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you know any, I mean, there seemed to be, in the conclusions of law section, there was sort of new language there that, again, lots of these things are sort of boilerplate, but there was new language in there. Did anything strike you? I know that decision is not in this record, so I can't point you to it and have you read it, but.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I probably can't comment without having it in front of me, just because I didn't commit the whole thing to memory.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll move on from that then. Back to your pre-filed testimony regarding your job responsibilities. You say, I am responsible for corporate accounting, treasury, actuarial, underwriting, customer billing, and enrollment, right?
Correct.
So you are responsible for Blue Cross's actuarial and underwriting decisions. Is that accurate?
True. Yes.
Yes. All right. You also say, I oversee management and external financial audit processes to assure that effective financial systems are in place. Is that in your pre-filed?
Yep. Yes,
So to the extent Blue Cross's financial systems are effective or ineffective, that's in your portfolio of responsibilities. Is that fair?
that's fair.
Okay. You also said, I am responsible for managing all aspects of our financial operations. Is that in your pre-filed?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so again, how well Blue Cross is operating financially, that's on you, and you take responsibility for Blue Cross's financial condition?
I do.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sure I'll have a few more questions for you in the confidential session, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we take a 5-minute break before we move to board questions? Come back at 9:13. Chair Foster, do you have questions for Ms. Green?
I do, yes. Hi, Ms. Green, thanks for being here today. With Blue Cross's proposed fiscal year 26 rates for individual plans, how much would an individual silver plan cost in Vermont on Blue Cross?
That is outlined in one of the exhibits. I can dig that out for you.
Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know that particular plan off the top of my head now. Can you say again which plan?
Well, there's a couple different individual silver.
All right, I'm in a small group. Individual silver. So the individual, you're looking at a standard silver.
Yes.
The single rate for 2026 standard silver, I'm quoting off of Exhibit 9B, individual page 1, is $1,730.86 per member per month or per month. The single rate.
How much would that be for a family of 4 for a year?
Family of 4 for a year. It's $4,863 a month. So for a year, that would be $58,364.
Have you reviewed MVP's rate request for fiscal year 26?
I reviewed the L&E report on the L&E request. I did not review the MVP submission.
Do you know how much an individual silver plan for a family of 4 for a year would cost for MVP for fiscal year 26 if their rates are approved?
I don't have that handy.
Do you know the disparity in plan cost between MVP and Blue Cross for fiscal year 25?
For fiscal year 25, it varies across all the different plans. But broadly speaking, we were in 2024, we had, on average, parity to plus 2 or 3%. And then in 2025, that widened significantly with the rate increases that were approved and implemented for 2025. So that widened to, some plans are 10% or more different and others are less than 10%, but it's a pretty significant differential. And that's widened and narrowed over the years, over the last 10 to 12 years. And that is something that we can follow up with on a plan-by-plan basis in writing, if you'd like.
Well, do you know what the disparity would be for fiscal year 26 as a percentage basis? How much more expensive a Blue Cross plan would be?
I haven't seen the analysis since the L&E reports have been issued. What was submitted and filed by each of Blue Cross and MVP changed pretty dramatically as a result of the L&E reports. I haven't looked at the differential in light of those recommendations. And of course, we still have the hospital budget piece to add into that as well.
I believe the healthcare advocate referenced some stickiness that Blue Cross has had with its client base, despite this disparity growing over the last couple of years anyway. What level of confidence, actually, let me back up a different way. What analysis have you done for fiscal year 26 as to whether or not customers will switch from Blue Cross to MVP, given the increasing disparity in premium costs?
I can't speak to the 2026 analysis. As I said, we haven't done a side-by-side by plan on that because it hasn't been calculated yet. But I can say that when we had the increased rate differential for 2025, we did plan to lose membership. And when enrollment took place for the January 1st, as the HCA indicated, the small group retention was sort of consistent with our expectations. And on the individual side, we retained more than we expected. Some of that has to do with the subsidies, kind of muting the effect of the increases on the individual market. But nonetheless, we did retain more membership than we expected there. So what that might mean to 2026, and based on my read of MVP's report from L&E, I would expect that there'd still be membership movement between the two carriers. And that's happened off and on over the course of the life of the ACA market.
Do you have any concern about the sustainability of your QHP offerings membership if that disparity increases, by 23%, 20% this year?
Well, the disparity won't be 20%, but I understand, I think your question is about, with a very large increase on the individual side, we would expect to lose membership. We also have the subsidies, the enhanced subsidies that are going away. So we do expect to lose membership. I don't have concerns about the membership dropping to a level that wouldn't be viable as a market. As an example, we continue to serve the large group market, which is much, much smaller than the QHP market. So, and we do track historically the changes in membership on the QHP market based on the rate increases, and happy to share that with you in writing afterwards and follow up if that's of interest.
Not as of now. I guess my primary question really is whether or not there's any analysis for 2026 of any membership drop that would result from the disparity in price of premium for Blue Cross versus MVP. And I think it sounds like the answer is no.
Not anything out of the normal course. So for instance, in reviewing the L&E reports for both Blue Cross and MVP, I think the small group rates are actually the rate increases for small groups, setting aside the adjustments for hospital budget decisions, are actually very close. So I think the small groups will be very close. On the individual side, it will be higher and it'll widen that disparity. But my sense is that the the reduction in the enhanced subsidies and the APTC will probably have a larger effect than what we'd see due to the rate differential.
Sure. Okay. And I understand the, I guess I'll call it pushback on the affordability guidance and the affordability component of our statutory obligations in which we review these rates. But in your opinion, is a $58,000 per year premium affordable for a Vermont family?
If you take it into the context of someone's income and the ability to pay for health insurance, the Vermont health insurance market is not affordable for young families especially.
Do you have any opinion as to what families or what percentage of families on your individual plans a $58,000 per year premium is affordable?
That would require some analysis around where the subsidies kick in and how, you know, how
Well,
many of
but you're
the
presuming they're
families.
going away in connection with these rates for 26.
We're presuming that the enhanced subsidies are going away. The subsidies will still be in place as they were before ARPA increased the subsidies. So I don't have that information handy to speak to.
I want to talk a little bit about administrative costs. I pulled together a couple exhibits because I think it'll help to look at them together. They're from documents that Blue Cross had produced. Abby, could you pull those up for me, please?
Yep, pulling that up right now.
Let's go to the second slide. So this is from Exhibit 1, page 6, the actuarial memo, and it has administrative charges. It indicates administrative charges were 24 million in 22, 27 million in 23, 29 million in 24. And these are the administrative charges just for the QHP plans?
Yes.
And what is that number for 2025?
I don't have that in my notes here.
Do you know
It's
approximately?
probably in the filing. It's probably in the actuarial memorandum, and we could dig that out if you want to do that now, but yeah, I don't have that handy.
Why don't you do that during a break or when a different witness is testifying? I think that'd be helpful. Same question for 2026. What are the budgeted administrative charges for 2026 for QHP?
Yeah, we can dig that out. Yep.
Do you know whether they're higher or lower than in 2024?
I don't know in absolute dollar amounts if they're higher or lower. I know on the actuarial memorandum that was submitted, the per member per month amounts, I think are going up slightly. And then as a percentage of premium, they are going down. So it's this exhibit, it's important to just remember what the membership volume is behind the administrative charges in the column there. We can, we can go there now, or maybe when Martine testifies, we can look at the actuarial memorandum that shows the per member per month calculations around the administrative charges, which would then feed into this exhibit.
Yeah, I'm looking for the absolute dollars. Okay, so it looks like from 2022 to 2024, it was about a 23-ish% increase in administrative charges for the QHPs. Can you explain the drivers of that 23% increase in those 3 years?
Again, I'd want to look at the per member per month amounts in that because we did have membership changes in those years. So we'd want to make sure that we're adjusting for the volume in that increase. We do know that the administrative costs in the last few years at an enterprise level have been, very modest increases. So a lot of that increase was probably driven by volume.
Can you explain how volume would impact the administrative charges?
So the amount of administrative charges that we include in premium is a calculation that's in the actuarial memorandum, and the analysis is detailed there. On this chart, we multiply that actual per member per month rate times the volume of membership that we had in each of these years. So that's why the administrative charge dollar amount changes both based on the costs as well as the volume.
So I'm trying to get at the costs. Can you explain what the cost increases were in these years?
I'm looking for the per member per month analysis in the actuarial. Yeah, I don't have the history in the binder that shows the 22 through 24 on a per member per month basis. So we can certainly take that away and provide that.
Right, that'd be appreciated. So what we're looking for is how much of these administrative charge increases relate to volume versus cost. So for example, cost could include, and I'm making this up because I don't know the answer, additional marketing spend, additional administrative staff, whatever it may be. Different programs that are initiated, whatever they are, we're trying to understand what those are. And I would also like to understand what the impact of those additional costs and expenditures were. In terms of calculating administrative charges, Blue Cross has a number of additional business segments or business lines. Is that correct?
Yes.
How does Blue Cross allocate administrative charges across business lines?
We have a comprehensive allocation module that takes all of the costs by cost center, and each cost center has documented in this allocation model sort of what the drivers of the costs are. So the drivers might be in membership, and we split costs by membership. Another cost center might be driven by the number of claims that are processed. So all of the cost centers have a predetermined set of allocation drivers. And then if they're direct costs, they get allocated across the segments that cost center supports. And then we add that all up, and each segment will have a per member per month allocation, at the end of that calculation. And then when the filing for each segment is submitted, that's when the projections for the future come into play. And so the per member per month administrative charges are layered into premiums at that point.
So let's take as an example of a cost that may be across the organization. Would take executive compensation. Executive compensation is X dollars. Let's call it, I'm going to make up a totally fictitious number, we'll call it $5 million. How would you take that $5 million and determine how much of it goes to QHP?
If there's cost centers that include costs that are what I would describe as indirect, or in some cases people call it overhead. So executive compensation might be one of those. We do allocate sort of the executives that are in charge of claims would go based on the share of claims. Other executives would be spread based on membership. But to the extent that we have true overhead, like board governance costs, it's a relatively small number, but that would be often allocated based on membership share, and is sort of a, all segments that are overseen by that governance process would share in those costs.
Is there any weighting? So QHP has, I forget the exact number now, but X thousands of members. ASO has X number of members. Is there any weighting between the ASO market for the membership numbers when you allocate costs?
The weighting is driven by the volume share. So if the ASO members are, say, approximately half of our total book of business, they would often be, for many of the overhead costs, would be taking half of that. Again, if there's interest in the specifics, we can share that. But the concept is that those indirect costs are shared. We have at Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont, our operating model is very lean, and we have a very high percentage of fixed costs versus variable costs. So it is just a natural outcome of the allocation that each of the segments takes a quote fair share of each of these fixed costs across the book.
And when you say it's the weighting is driven by volume share of what? Claims, membership? What is?
It can vary. If the indirect costs are doing something with respect to claims, say the fraud, waste, and abuse team that's working on claims, those indirect costs would be spread based on share of claims, usually volume of claims. There may be occasions where there's other dimensions of claims that are used, but and then similarly, if the function has to do with managing enrollment or dealing with premium and billing, for example, that would be allocated on share of membership claims. So it varies depending on which type of activity we're allocating.
Okay, thank you. Is there a policy or a memo that outlines how these costs are allocated?
Yep, we do have that, and we can provide that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. I want to go to slide 4. These are the marketing expenses pulled from Blue Cross Blue Shield's Act 152 reports over a couple of years. So this is from the 2021 Act 152 report that Blue Cross provided. And it says Vermont marketing and advertising expenses for well, let me ask, is this for 2021 or is this a 2021 report on year 2020?
I did not label the particular exhibit, but I believe the Act, when we submit an Act 152 report for 2021, it's for the expenses in 2021. The actual report is submitted in 2022.
I see. Okay. So if you take advertising and marketing expenses, those are, let me ask, are those classified as an administrative charge?
Yes, in the context of what we were just looking at, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And then how do you allocate advertising and marketing expenses vis-a-vis the various business lines for administrative charge tracking?
Yeah, the marketing and advertising expenses are probably one of the set of cost centers that is more complicated than some of the other ones. We do look at the costs that were incurred during the year, and to the extent that they related to a particular segment, they would be charged to that segment. If they were more general in nature, like a more broad brand type of advertising, then that would be allocated through a more indirect methodology, such as what we just talked about in terms of the segments sharing in those costs.
Got it. Okay. We have a number of Girls on the Run Blue Cross Blue Shield water bottles in my house. That would be an example of a general marketing expense, and that would be allocated across the various business lines based on some sort of volume adjustment.
Yeah, the specific example of Girls on the Run is funded through the Vermont Caring for Children's Foundation. So that is not included. That particular example is not included.
Okay.
But if we were doing a Blue Crew event for the community, I'd have to track back through whether or not that's specifically included in marketing and advertising expenses. But yes, that would be the type of costs that might be included in this category.
Okay. And then if you go to the next slide, 2022, looks like it's $274,000. 2023, $549,000. I was wondering if you could speak generally to the increase in advertising dollars from 2021 to 22 to 23.
I can't speak to that in the moment. We can certainly follow up with that as a specific written response. I do know that each year, as we go into an open enrollment period, we'll be looking at what's required to help members make decisions through an open enrollment period. And I know that in some of these years, and I going from memory might have the years wrong, but as we're going into a year where there might be subsidies, or we had a year, probably not these 2 years, where we implemented the silver load, and we needed to make sure that members could navigate the silver loading changes. So there will be changes that are driven in part by guiding the members through an open enrollment period. But we can certainly follow up with the specifics on a year-by-year basis.
Okay. And then next slide, fiscal year 24, looks like it dropped down to 255. What's the marketing expenditure for fiscal year 25, and what's in the budget for fiscal year 26?
So we haven't done our budgets for 2026 yet, but in 24 and in 2025, marketing and advertising was one of the areas that we reduced the discretionary portion of that spend, meaning anything that wasn't absolutely required, we cut out. So the remaining in this bucket for 24 and 25, I can dig out the actuals for that and follow up afterwards, are usually member materials that were required to comply with regulations, the materials that were required to send to members.
Okay, yeah, getting the actual numbers for 25 and have you had any discussions around what 2026 marketing spend would be?
No, actually, well, we do talk about it, but the conversations are usually, gee, we have to kind of wait and see what the rates are and how, back to your earlier question, how they compare to MVP and what sort of changes, for instance, with the enhanced subsidies going away. We'll be having those conversations about what's required for the balance of this year. And then for 2026, it would be budgeted sort of knowing what we know about membership volumes. But 2026 marketing and advertising is often driven by 2027 open enrollment for 2027. So, the conversations around 2025 right now are all about what's the minimum necessary to support our members as they renew and make decisions for 1/1/26.
And you believe fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26, or sorry, fiscal year 25 is below that $255,000 number?
I believe the budget is, yes, but I will definitely follow up with the data point on that.
I'm going to move to executive compensation. Do you have a plan for, actually, let me ask it this way. So this is the Act 152 report from 2021, and it has a table of executive compensation. Can you describe how Blue Cross determines executive compensation?
The executive compensation is overseen by the board of the Vermont Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont Board of Directors, and they use an outside consultant to look at the executive compensation, and through that process, a board level process, they make recommendations.
Actually, sorry, backing up on one last one on marketing. So for the QHP Exhibit 1, page 6, you had a loss of $36 million. And there was some amount, I'm going to presume, in that $36 million loss that was connected to marketing. You had a marketing expense, there was a loss, it had to come out of somewhere. Where does that loss come out of, or that expense for marketing come out of if there's a loss on the book?
So the marketing expense, and to be clear, the marketing expenses on these pages are shared across the entire book of business, subject to what I said earlier about if there's something really specific to a market segment. But yeah, the administrative costs are part of the costs that need to be covered by premiums. And if premiums are not sufficient to cover them, then it ends up on the loss on that exhibit. So a portion of this 255 on the screen right now would be in that number.
And then where's that money come from to pay it?
Well, like claims or any other costs that we have to pay as an organization, that will come out of our cash reserves.
Okay. All right. And so you testified as to executive compensation, the board sets it and they have an outside consultant that they work with?
Yes.
And is there an incentive plan?
There is an incentive plan, yes.
Can you describe the incentive plan?
As part of the compensation structure for our entire organization, both staff and executives, a portion of the compensation is withheld, if you will, and it's subject to achievement of a set of goals. And each year those goals are set in the context of both the financial and operational goals of the organization. And the incentive plan pays out different percentages across different staff levels based on achievement of those goals. And that's reviewed and approved by the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont board.
Can you explain what the goals are that are set to try and achieve?
Yeah, in the past, the numbers that you have on the screen there for 2021, for the past many years, the goals take sort of a balanced business scorecard approach. If you're familiar with that mechanism, it looks at financial goals, it looks at customer goals. There's a category for operating effectiveness goals, and then there's a set of goals around staff engagement. And so, you know, there's a number of goals within each of those categories that are shared with the whole organization and tracked and monitored. So, for instance, in the staff category, you'd have an engagement survey once a year, and we also have some goals within the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to move forward some initiatives in that area. So upon achievement of this collection of goals across the 4 dimensions, there's a prescribed, when going into any given year, there's a prescribed process for determining the weighting of each goal and what the target payout would be upon achievement of all the targets.
And it looked like to me that in the years I looked at, I think I looked at 2019 through 2024, there had been no bonuses paid out, but for the one in 2021 to the one individual who is listed last there. Is that correct? There have been no bonuses paid out from 2019 to 2024, to your knowledge?
No, that's not correct. I think the way this exhibit is defined is that the salary includes salary and incentives. So if it's a normal portion of the compensation, the compensation that when the consultant looks at the total compensation, I think the salary includes the incentive in this particular case. That 50,000 from 2021, I would have to follow up on exactly what that special, seemingly special payment was. But the salary and incentive variable comp piece of salaries is included in the column labeled 2.
Okay. Could you produce the incentive plan for executives and the breakdown between salary and bonus from 2019 to 2025 for us?
Yes, so just make sure I got that 2019 to 2025 breakdown of. So you want a copy of the comp plan or the incentive plan or both?
Yeah, I think we can do the comp plan and incentive plan just for 2025 and 2026. And then for the breakdown between bonus and salary, our base from 2019 to 2025. So one of the things we've asked hospitals and the ACO about with regard to compensation is whether or not the structure of it is consistent with Vermont state healthcare goals. And we moved for legislation this year with the legislature relating to ensuring that executive compensation in hospitals is in alignment with the principles of healthcare reform at 18 VSA 9371. Do you know whether or not Blue Cross, its incentive plan is aligned with the principles of healthcare reform?
I personally do not, but we can certainly have a look at that and follow up.
Is there any component to the executive bonus structure that relates to affordability?
We have, I'm going to back up a little bit, if I may, Chair Foster. The goals for 2025 were shifted to be somewhat different than they had been in the past because it needed to focus completely on execution of our recovery plan. So we did make that adjustment. I meant to mention that when we were talking about how it works. So the goals from 21 through 2024 have been very similar to past years, but 2025 we did make a shift. In response to your question about affordability, in past years we've had specific goals around the programs that we included in attachment D. So if we had a particular program that we were implementing to achieve certain types of cost containment results around a particular program, say, for example, one of the latest programs we're working on is home infusion. If from time to time, we will include, depending on the organizational focus, part of the goals to implement those programs and achieve the types of savings that we set out to achieve. So not directly described as an affordability goal, but certainly getting at one of our roles in the healthcare system to put forward cost containment measures that we think will improve the cost of healthcare.
Great. So the cost containment efforts, kind of described generally in that exhibit and the rest of the filings, really appeared to me to be pretty focused on non-hospital claims, really. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And I think part of my impression of that is that there's quite a bit of description of the difficulty in negotiating with, in particular, UVM and some other hospitals. And I think there was some documentation about how efforts were unsuccessful because of some of the negotiating leverage and pressures that you felt. So I guess my question is, can you characterize these cost containment efforts and how they relate to Vermont hospitals?
Yeah, I would characterize them that all the cost containment programs are set out to be applied to all providers. And, we're looking at our entire provider network when we're implementing those programs. We do find in the case of hospitals, many times there's a change that we would be proposing, and then the hospital might say, well, gee, if that's going to cut back revenue to them in this space, then they would negotiate to increase revenue in another space. So that's an example, one example of what we mean when we say sometimes it's difficult to implement these programs because there's that revenue to someone, and there's often pushback through the negotiating factor. And I can certainly expect that Andrew Garland and his testimony could speak more specifically to that. He's closer to some of those examples. But by and large, the cost containment programs that we have, we set out more from the perspective of where are the activities and how are they impacting members and quality of services and healthcare delivered to members. And then it's whatever provider happens to be involved in that process, that we don't steer away from one provider over another.
Can you describe your success at implementing these cost containment measures with Vermont hospitals?
I would characterize it broadly as we're getting better with the cost surge last year. We were investing some resource to really dive much deeper than we normally do. We have a lot of claims monitoring that goes on a regular basis, but we were able to find a few places where billing practices or payment practices were creeping away from some of our policies. So we would follow up with hospitals or providers on those items. So it's a key part of everything we do. I can't put a number to it. I haven't seen our cost containment activity broken down by facility, but that is definitely an area that we spend a lot of time sort of across the board working on quality and cost containment.
It seems like, I hear Blue Cross say their impression is that they're underfunded, and I hear hospitals say their impression that they're underfunded, and I hear Vermonters say that they are overfunding a lot. And it appears like from all these documents that part of the underfunding is really a statement as to the cost of the claims. And if there's cost containment efforts going on, I think it's really important at this stage where we are in healthcare to evaluate the effectiveness of the cost containment efforts in the particular areas where there's really high costs. What's driving your financial difficulties in making sure that the cost containment efforts are effective in those areas. The cost containment efforts aren't free. They cost money, I'm sure, and a lot of work and hard work and effort. And so I think it would be valuable for Blue Cross to do an accounting of how the cost containment efforts have been working as to the segments of its business where it has challenges. And from the record, it really looks like that's largely prescription drugs and hospital charges. So I will ask that you provide some information as best you can and follow up as to how these cost containment impacts have been effective in those troubling areas.
You know, we certainly will do that, Chair Foster. I will also just point out and as part of the RBC response plan, cost containment and claims monitoring is a key part of that plan as well. And there's a number of activities that are underway that we'll be sharing with the Department of Financial Regulation, and can certainly include the board in that readout.
That would be great. And my concern here is you might try really hard, you might design great programs, but given the tension with your negotiating leverage, I don't know that I'm confident they'll be effective. I mean, much of the testimony is that we have difficulty because of network adequacy or leverage or whatever it is, being on a level playing field. So if you do all this great cost containment and then somebody says, we're going to walk from your network, where are we?
You're exactly right.
So if the board were to give Blue Cross these reserves and that fundamental issue doesn't change, what's to keep this money from not being enough again?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why it's important for the stakeholders that, you know, we are very appreciative of the collective efforts of all the stakeholders in Vermont's healthcare system to get at some of those structural issues, because any one of us can't really make the progress that's needed, as you indicate. So we need to do both. We need to restore Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont's financial ability to weather storms when unexpected things come along, and we also need to really tackle, you know, the root source of some of the high healthcare costs that we've been unable to rein in over the last few years.
You know, a lot of people have put in a lot of work and through those May Day work groups and everything everyone's doing, but I don't know that we're seeing results. And I think we should be appreciative of results. And we have to be accountable to results right now, not just effort. We need to be accountable for results. And I am disappointed that the May Day group meetings that a lot of people put time in resulted in, as far as I know, $0.00 of savings. That's just, I'm not blaming Blue Cross, everyone, myself, everybody's involved in it. But it's just not okay to say to Vermonters, we couldn't come up with anything amongst all these healthcare leaders. Nothing we could do is not an acceptable answer to Vermont right now, not at all. Going back to executive comp briefly, you have the outside consultant, are the salaries benchmarked?
Yes.
One thing that did jump out to me in flipping through those Act 152 reports, Abby, you can go to page 9. Page 9 is 2021. It looked like the compensation was pretty flat from 2019 to 2022. So in 2021, the top salary was 682, 2022 is 695. But then in 2023, it jumped to 863 with 62 other. And in 2024, it jumped to 943 with 66 other. And I was just curious, it was kind of about a, 5, 6, 7% increase over 3 or 4 years. And then in the last 2 years, 23 and 24, by my calculations, like a 30, 35%, 36% increase. Do you know what that increase was attributed to?
And are you speaking about the total or just one particular line?
Well, they all went up pretty significantly from 23 to 24 and had been pretty static 2019 through 2022. But I guess I'm focused on the top line number, the top position. it really jumped about 35% in those 2 years. I was just wondering what caused the jump? What was that attributed to?
I can't speak to that in the moment right now, but as we can certainly follow up with the details on that.
Key focus of your testimony pre-filed and today is on the reserves, which I very much appreciate. It's a concern for the board, of course, I think the entire state. And as I understand it, the reserve issue is a big driver of this year's rate request and last year's and potentially future years. As you testified, that the main component of the recovery is getting appropriate, in Blue Cross's view, contributions to reserves. So I want to understand some of the drivers of losses of reserves. I put together a chart on the next page. This is just sort of to be, sorry, the last page maybe, or second to last. 14, yeah. So we have some of this information. Actually, Abby, could you scroll up a little so you can see the top? Oops, sorry, just on the, yeah, okay. So, yeah, so QHP, I filled out the numbers myself for each year. From the documentation of what the losses were or gains. Oops, sorry. Yeah, there we go. And I'd like to ask Blue Cross to fill out this chart, or if there's a different business lines or segments that'd be more appropriate than what I derived. I think that'd be really helpful. But really quickly, I wanted to get just a understanding of what some of these things were. Can you explain what self-funded Blue Edge, that's your ASO business line?
Self-funded Blue Edge is a piece of our ASO business line. And we have other self-funded accounts that are not Blue Edge designs.
Okay. CBA Blue?
Yes, CBA Blue is a third-party administrator that is administered by an organization called Cobalt Benefits Group, which is an entity that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont shares ownership with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, but they serve employers who want to typically they serve employers that want to carve out various aspects of their benefit plans, and so they perform what would be described as typical TPA, third-party administrator services, and so that would be the Vermont membership in the CBA Blue line item. Think of it as a type of self-funded business.
Okay, and then FEP and host.
FEP is the Federal Employees Program. So the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association has a nationwide program for serving federal employees. So Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont serves the federal employees in Vermont who buy our product. And host is the processing and the fees related to the Blue Card network, where Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont processes claims for other Blue plans as part of the Blue Card network.
And then Blue Cross still has Medicare Part D prescription drug product.
We have a Medicare Part D prescription drug product that's in a joint enterprise with 3 other New England states, and that's administered through a CMS program.
And then Medicare Advantage, that you had a Medicare Advantage program, but you do not plan for 26, do I have that right?
The Medicare Advantage program is one of the items that we would have in our non-public testimony. but the Medicare Advantage segment is a segment that offers the Medicare Advantage products through the CMS program, and that's administered through Vermont Blue Advantage. So it's in a separate entity, much like CBA Blue.
Right.
And
Okay,
the Med Sup,
you don't own the entirety of that product, is that right?
right.
And the Medicare Advantage program, when did that start?
We launched that in 2021.
And then MedSup.
Yeah, Med Sup is a product line that we offer, and it's standard plans as designed and dictated by CMS.
And if you lose money on any of these other business, let me back up. Since 2020, has Blue Cross lost money on any of these other business lines?
Yes, we've lost money on a number of them.
And if Blue Cross loses money on these other business lines, does that come out of reserves?
It does.
You know approximately how much money has been lost on Medicare Advantage?
In my pre-filed testimony of Exhibit 23, page 36, we show the changes in surplus, which includes the losses, and the Medicare Advantage losses, from 2020 to 2024 was 51.2 million. The losses on all the other segments was 138.6 million.
I'm sorry, what page?
That is page 36 of my pre-filed testimony, Exhibit 23.
Right. Is Blue Cross seeking a 7% contribution to reserve from these other business lines?
All of the insured business lines that are, filed insured premiums are inclusive of a 7% CTR. There's, probably an exception to that rule. Martine can testify, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think within the Med Sup lines, we have to, after we put together a rate filing, we have to test each of the rates against the minimum loss ratios. And to the extent that that test is not met, we do have to back off the 7% a little bit in order to achieve that test. But the policy and the goal is all insured lines will have the 7% CTR.
Okay. And what about the non-insured lines?
The self-funded lines are have a similar contribution to reserve level or requirement, but it's not anywhere near as large just because of the risk is so much smaller. But all of the self-funded groups are, with the exception of our largest clients, are priced to a target margin.
Now, on the ASOs, are they priced to a target margin of a 7%?
It's an equivalent of a 7% CTR for the reserve portion of that pricing. The margin on the self-funded accounts comes more from just the straight up fees and how the fees cover expenses. And for our largest clients, that has been another source of losses over the last few years. But each year, as I outlined in the recovery plan, we've been increasing the revenue coming in from each of those large clients to reduce those losses over time. The large clients renew in cycles, so they'll often go to RFP and require a multi-year contract. So when those contracts are up, we are actively pursuing increases in revenues on those clients as well.
Okay. In your pre-filed testimony, there was a line about reserves going to, in addition to paying claims, they're used for member growth, new markets, et cetera. Can you explain, or actually, I guess when we felt the chart, it'd be good to see how much of the reserves have been used for member growth and new market. I just really want a full picture of all the drivers of the RBC losses over the last, I guess, 5 years.
Yeah, if you turn to page 36 in Exhibit 23, that is the granular set of all the changes. The membership change is embedded in the line second from the bottom there that goes into the calculation of RBC. It's called ACL, risk-based capital, which will change based on the membership volume. And you can see how some years that goes up and other years it goes down. In recent years, it has gone up because of both the volume of membership increasing, but also as medical trend and pharmacy trend increases, we're required to put more reserves aside for that higher cost membership. So perhaps we could start with the information that's going in and out of reserves on that exhibit, and then if there's a place where we would want to drill down, we can certainly follow up on that in more detail offline.
Yeah, let me just pull that up. Here we go. Yeah, so Exhibit 23, page 36. Underwriting gain loss includes PDR. What is PDR?
The premium deficiency reserve, that's what PDR stands for, and it's a statutory accounting that requires us to record losses in the current year for any contracts that are predicted to be underwater for the following year. So sometimes we look at it excluding PDR, and sometimes we can see it including PDR, but it just doesn't change the amount of the losses. It just changes the period in which the losses are recorded.
And then pension asset losses and litigation recovery. Is that 2020? Blue Cross Blue Shield lost $35.2 million out of reserves for pension losses. And is that right? Pension losses?
That's true. That was the Allianz strategy that failed, and the recovery on the litigation for that is 2 columns over for 26.7 million. And then in 2021, if you go one line down, the action that we took to freeze the pension plan increased surplus by 10 million. So if you net the $35 million loss and then the 10 million and the 26 million together, the all-in impact of that is slightly positive. I think it's about 1.8.
Okay. So you lost 35.2 million on the Allianz investment losses. You regained 26.7 in litigation, and then you froze pension contributions in 2021 for 10 million.
We froze the pension benefit plan, meaning that the benefits would not grow any longer. we didn't freeze contributions. We still have to make contributions over time to the extent that the plan requires it, but we froze the benefit structure of plans.
Okay, yeah, this is helpful. I think breaking this down by the business lines would be really helpful as well. That granularity would be great. There is a large multi-district litigation involving the Blue Cross Association in Alabama, a multi-district case, I think is out of Alabama. There's two components to it. I think that case settled nationally for a couple $1 billion or so. Did Blue Cross Vermont have to pay out any money in connection with that larger settlement?
There are a couple of different settlements, one relating to policyholders and one relating to providers. And I'll have to follow up on exactly which years those were recorded in, but they were recorded. They were recorded when those settlements occurred. So I think the provider one was recorded in 2024.
And those payments, do those come out of reserves?
Yep, they do. The payment, we have some E&O and D&O coverage for payments such as that. And so the amount that is reflected in the financial statements is reflective of an estimated recovery from the coverage. But yes, it's included in these losses.
And where is that reflected on Exhibit 23?
I believe those would be, I'll have to follow up on that. I think that's in the underwriting gain loss line item, but I don't know that. I'll have to follow up on which line item.
Give me just 1
I'm
minute.
thinking it's in, sorry, Chair Foster, I believe it's in the other income expense line, which is about halfway down the list. And I'll confirm that, but I believe that was partly in 2020 and partly in 2024.
So those are both positive numbers, right? 2020, I'm having a hard time following this. Other income expense, 2020 is a $2 million loss, 2024 is a $0.3 million loss.
Right, and that is normally a, call it a $2 to $3 million gain. There was an increase in 2023 that I'll have to follow up on, but I'm just pointing out that I believe that that's where the MDL settlement is, and I'll follow up to confirm.
Okay, but that line has other things that would offset that to make it a higher number. It doesn't just reflect the MDL loss.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes.
Right. Okay. One minute. I want to talk a little bit about some of the legislation that was passed this year, and I appreciated Blue Cross's testimony on a number of these pieces. I thought it was very important. One of the bills, 482, has some emergency powers for the Care Board, H482. I guess, back up, I think it's, I forget what document it's in, but there's a large amount of evidence relating to the commercial charges at Vermont hospitals that you have to pay. And I was curious how you would characterize the commercial prices at Vermont hospitals.
Well, as a lot of our communications to the public and the legislature is that we have pulled strong evidence and data that says that the commercial prices in Vermont are much, much higher than experienced elsewhere. either in New England or nationally.
And a number of our Vermont hospitals are in difficult financial positions themselves. Lowering commercial prices could be challenging or result in difficult decisions being made. If we are interested in affordability and solvency, and of course we are, and sustainability, is it Blue Cross's position that the care board should lower commercial prices at Vermont hospitals?
Well, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is very supportive of the new legislation. I think it was S-126. I don't know what act that turned into, but it has the reference-based pricing regulations in it. And we do believe that that is an avenue to sustainably, lower healthcare costs. But I think the implementation of that would have to take into account the financial conditions at the various hospitals and entities that are delivering care in Vermont. But yeah, I do think that commercial prices do need to come down. And as we know, and as the board has shared in their information, that some hospitals are in different financial places than others.
Can you explain what impact H482, also known as Act 49, that was passed by the legislature this year, had on your rate request this year?
The impact that it had on the rate request is that it definitely increased our confidence that we could, as the HCA questions indicated, how do we decide if we can stay in a market and commit to paying all of our policyholders' claims no matter what. And so having that act in place is very important for us to be able to know that there's a safety net, if you will, if Blue Cross were to get into another situation where RBC was a mere 15 weeks, or not RBC, but our reserves were a mere 15 weeks of insured claims payments, that there is some action that could be taken. So it had the effect of increasing our confidence that we could stick with this market and work in the long term to reduce healthcare costs. But it didn't and wouldn't have a specific impact on the rate development, because the rate development is about restoring Blue Cross Blue Shield's, having adequate rates and then restoring our reserves to a level where we can operate as the shock absorber for the healthcare system in Vermont. So, Act 482 is, Act 49, H482 is very, very important as an underpinning component of the overall healthcare system. And it does help us increase our confidence in kind of moving forward. But it is, the threshold for action under that act is 150% RBC. And at that point, that's when DFR is required to take action. So we would not be targeting to operate at that level. So it's more of a safety net as opposed to something that plays into a specific rate decision.
Right. So I view it the same way. There's a safety net provision there that allows you to lower prices in emergency situations. Why does that not offset your need for your level of reserve request?
The level of reserve request is driven by our need to have a fully funded rate in 2026. And as we can see so far in 2025, even though we priced a CTR of 7%, we're currently realizing much less than that. So in order to be confident that we're going to have a contribution to reserve in 2026, we need to include an assumption that allows us to have confidence that when we get through 2026, we know we haven't misestimated those healthcare costs once again, and we're able to add to reserve and push the recovery forward. So that's why the CTR request is 7%, and it wouldn't change based on a safety net for what would happen if we were to hit 150% RBC.
Doesn't reducing the cost of the claims through an emergency authority provided by 482, isn't that equivalent to some level of reserve need? You don't need the reserves if you can lower the claims cost.
Well, those lower claim costs would happen only if we were to hit 150% RBC. And
Correct.
we don't have a plan to do that in 2026.
So there was no change in your RBC request or your CTR request due to Act 49?
No.
I want to talk a little bit about, you're referencing a concern that the rates won't be enough in various scenarios, and there's a number of things that can drive that. And I want to explore some of those things that you've talked about previously. So the three that I want to talk about are this concept of budget neutrality, which I think is a function of some negotiations and discussions with various hospitals. That's number one. Number two is what I'll call rate allocation, where through negotiations, Blue Cross's contracts with hospitals have certain rates going higher and others going lower on different service lines. And then why don't we start with those two? So the concept of budget neutrality, which I think is referenced in some of the public materials, can you explain what that is and how it's worked in the past?
With all due respect, Chair Foster, is this a set of questions that we could cover with Andrew Garland's testimony? I believe he's very close to that. I can certainly give you my answers to that, but Andrew might be more relevant.
I think that's right. I think it does touch on both. So why don't you give me your best understanding, and we can explore it deeper with Mr. Garland.
Sure. My understanding of the budget neutrality is that over many years, a lot of the contract negotiations, in normal contract negotiations, there is a give and take, and parties will say, I'll give this if you give that, and contract negotiations, my understanding is with providers also includes not just the rates themselves, but also certain rights of each party to do certain things operationally or through audit, et cetera. So anyway, through all of that back and forth over a number of years, it sort of developed in the context of an overall expectation that a provider would have for how their commercial budget would need to increase in a given year. If Blue Cross were to put forward a reduction, a proposal for a reduction, more often than not, and almost in every case, we did some work on that recently, the hospitals would come back and say, well, we can do that in that space, but we need to make it up in another space because our overall budget that's been approved is, say, a plus 3%. So the budget neutrality, I think, in my opinion, is something that maybe evolved initially in a space that wasn't a problem, but certainly when we're in a situation where we, as a collective in Vermont, need to reduce healthcare costs, this budget neutrality concept has really been a barrier to an overall reduction of costs, and often gets in the way of Blue Cross's ability to force, if you will, reductions.
So if the care board orders for hospitals say that the NPR is a cap and their rate increase is a cap, which means things can happen below it, and it's not an entitlement. It's not a quote budget that you're entitled to. It's a cap to which you can't go over. How do you view this budget neutrality approach consistent with our orders that say the rates are a cap and the NPR is a cap?
That's what I'm getting at, is that even though it is clearly a cap, Blue Cross, we've had this conversation for a number of years, and I don't know if it wasn't last year, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Blue Cross specifically went into the negotiation process with the narrative that, the budget was just a cap, and then here are the things that we expect to, negotiate lower on. And the responses to all of that work were overwhelmingly, well, this is what was approved, and we can make those changes, but we also need to make that revenue neutral. So this has been a challenge. And I think the other conversations that we've had recently is just the impracticality of Blue Cross saying, okay, well, unless you do that, we're going to take you out of our network. Vermont's network laws are quite rigorous for good reasons, for access to quality care. And frankly, it's just not a scenario that plays out well in terms of reducing costs ultimately. And that's definitely a piece that Andrew could speak more in more detail on, like what's the impact if we were to pull the trigger of, okay, because normally if you've got multiple providers in a certain geography and you're not getting what you need in a negotiation, you can say, well, we'll take you out of network. But in Vermont, that's not really a practical outcome.
And in response to this request that it be revenue neutral or budget neutral, did Blue Cross ultimately agree?
I think over the years, there were circumstances where we would agree to those things. There were places where we wouldn't agree to it because we didn't the negotiation moved on because we weren't willing to accept a neutrality position. In the most recent conversations, which Andrew will testify about later today, we have very specific lines in the sand, if you will, where we were no longer accepting this revenue neutrality concept at all. So it is something that I think is in need of kind of a structural change of some sort.
Could Blue Cross quantify for the board the amount of dollars that have been impacted through this revenue neutral negotiation and approach?
I don't think it's something that it lends itself to being quantified, because we'd have to go back through all of the negotiations over the years. But I can certainly take this back to our team and ask them if there's a way to think about how to quantify it. But I don't know if it's possible.
Okay. I'm trying to get a sense of scope on this, whether it's a big impact or a small impact, because I mean, the overarching concern I have is that it happens again. And if you have an appropriate claims denial for whatever reason, but the response is budget neutral, well, you're not going to have enough money. And the problem we're having is there's never enough money, and it's too much money. So if this budget neutral is a significant amount of money and it's not appropriate pursuant to the board's caps or your contracts, or, just for your membership and your fiduciary obligations to your members, this needs to change.
Absolutely. I will just, if I may, just clarify that the revenue neutrality comments that I was just making was very much in the context of contract negotiations. We do have, I'll call it more operational processing work that happens, and we do regularly get feedback from providers that say, well, if this is how you're going to process this claim, we think you should make it revenue neutral for us. And we do not, once the contract's negotiated and implemented, the claims need to be processed consistent with what the service was. And we do find that there's circumstances, not infrequent circumstances, where when we push back on a claim payment of some sort, the revenue neutrality topic will be brought up, but we definitely push back on that.
Well, do you push back or do you push back successfully?
It's hard work, and sometimes it's more successful than others. A more recent example to sort of increase our ability to push back is we've started to move some of that decision-making upstream in the claims processing, such that if a claim comes in with a certain type of circumstance, we'll just deny it, send it back, and have the provider resubmit it rather than paying it and then chasing them around. So that's just one out of many activities that we're doing to push back harder on some of these practices that really have increased the cost of healthcare overall.
Yeah, and I should say, I've never reviewed these claims. I have no idea if they're proper. If Blue Cross is incorrect in denying the claim, and maybe the hospital is correct in insisting that you pay the claim. But it sounds like from the way you're describing it, these are essentially claims that are being agreed are improper, because they're not saying, no, this is proper. They're saying, no, you got to make it up somewhere else. So my comments are really focused on that kind of situation. There's going to be disagreements between insurers and providers, often with quite strong views on both sides. But I think that just the concept of revenue neutral, no matter what, is one that's really going to drive healthcare costs. Right. Real quick, rate allocation, and I'm using that phrase to describe when Blue Cross in a hospital, actually, sorry, backing up to the budget neutrality concept, can you give me a sense of, you said hospitals, plural. How many Vermont hospitals have taken this approach with Blue Cross?
Which approach? The revenue neutrality?
Yeah, revenue neutrality, yeah.
I don't know the count. I'd have to ask the team. I know it's the UVM Health Network hospitals are the ones that come to mind immediately. And there's other hospitals, I'm sure, that our contracting team would list out for me.
Okay. And do you have a sense of how long this has been going on?
As I indicated earlier, I think I don't have a sense of when it started, but it has been sort of evolving for a number of years. And again, I think Andrew Garland could probably speak more directly to that, since he's a bit closer to the negotiating and the contracting process.
Okay. I think I'll stop there and save the rest for Mr. Garland and turn it over to the other board members. Thank you very much, Ms. Green.
You're welcome.
Board Member Holmes, questions?
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's good to see you, Ms. Green. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I hope you are too.
I am. Long day for all of us. Long year, I think, for all of us. Okay, so I do have some questions. I have to sort through some of them now because I think Chair Foster touched on some, but not all. And I might have similar questions, but from a different angle. I think part of this relates to, as you know, statute dictates that we have to consider whether a rate is affordable, promotes quality, promotes access. So, a lot of our questioning, I think, is around some of those three areas. I want to talk about Exhibit 5. That's that attachment D. It's the letter from you and Dr. Weigel to the Green Mountain Care Board, and it had the subject line of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont programs that enhance access, quality, and affordability for our members. It was dated 5/12/25. And on page 1, you do state Blue Cross is limited in our ability to lower the cost of health care. And then on page 2, you state that there are 2 levers that we can actually control to propose rates that are as affordable as possible. The programs that you outline below that aim to reduce underlying healthcare costs and the tight control we exert over administrative costs. So I'm going to talk similar to Chair Foster. I want to talk about both of those levers, the programs that you outlined in that letter, and then the administrative costs. I think I'll start with the program. So there's a long list of programs in there that you cite that reduce healthcare costs. There's many vendors that you seemingly use that you pay for to implement those programs. Surprised, frankly, by the number of different vendors, or maybe it's the same vendor, but a lot of vendors that are outsourced for some of these cost management programs. And you state in the letter, we have many innovative programs intended to show that our members receive the best care in the most appropriate and cost-effective location. Some of these programs are very mature with established returns on investment. That was on page 6 in that letter. So to substantiate this statement, and in the interest of time, my first request is that if you could follow up with data on the enterprise-wide annual costs of each program that are listed in that letter, the number of individual and small group enrollees that might be impacted by each of those programs, how long they've been in existence, and then the total proposed PMPM cost for an individual and for a small group member in 2026 for each program. Not looking for the delta or the increase from 25 to 26. I'm looking for the total allocated per member per month cost of each of those programs. And then what are you expecting in terms of savings per member from each program? Essentially, I think similar to Chair Foster's questions, really the burden of proof is on Blue Cross Blue Shield to show us that the QHP administrative dollars spent on these programs are efficient, they're effective, and they're going to improve affordability. So I want to, it's very difficult in this letter to understand if these are effective. It's a qualitative discussion of a lot of programs without much quantitative backing of their effectiveness. So I didn't want to go through all of the programs. I'm just going to ask for that in summary. Is that something that you or your teams could provide?
Yes, Dr. Weigel is also in charge of a lot of these programs, so we can take that request back and pull it together. And I also know that Andrew, again, was prepared to speak to some of the programs. But in terms of the comprehensive costs and savings, the number of QHP membership impacted, how long they've been in place, and the per member per month cost in 2026 of each program, that's something that we'd have to take back and have the team pull together.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just trying to understand, how much is being spent on these and what is the expected savings? I have a couple of questions that arose about specific programs, and not all of them, but again, really looking at the efficacy of some of these programs and ensuring there's not duplication. So, for example, there appear to be several different case management programs that are currently funded out of member premiums. So how do you ensure that there's not duplication of services and that dollars are efficiently spent? You've got Blueprint, you've got Better Beginnings, you've got your own case management team, you've got this Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont Specialty Health Support. As I was reading that document that you submitted, I wondered, is this an efficient use of all of these of these very scarce admin dollars for all of these case management programs?
Yeah, at a very high level, I'll just say that when the programs are being drawn up, so we have an inventory of programs and we look at the efficacy of each of the programs, and then there's new programs that come along that we consider whether or not we should add to the mix. et cetera. And the dynamic that you describe about how do we make sure it's not overlapping or taking into account the work that's already going on in one program. And that's often part of the assessment of the program. And if the program moves forward, the implementation is very much done by the same team of people that are managing all these programs. So they're looking at, so how will we attribute members to be affected by a particular program such that we know how they're also being coordinated by existing programs. So that's all part of sort of a planful look at the opportunities and where we should be looking. Our case management team is very focused on the member and kind of takes a holistic view of the membership. So they are looking at what kinds of programs would be useful for the members. We don't really sort of take a program and throw it at the membership and see what happens. It's more looked at, where can we use assistance in terms of effectively applying the various levers to from the members' perspective. So that's really the core work of the in-house team, is to both do their own work, but also know how each of the programs is coming to, if you will, sort of coming to the member, and how does the member see it. And it's not perfect. There is places where we'll say, oh, gee, we need to adjust it. But we do definitely take that into account.
Okay, well, maybe it'd be helpful in that when you take it back to the team to really, if that team can help us understand how you're ensuring there's not duplication of dollars spent on case management, care management. There does seem to be a lot of different programs doing similar attempts at case management. And to what end, I guess, in terms of savings would be helpful to understand. With respect to the value-based programs, VBIC, the Vermont Blue Integrated Care, and ECPC, the Enhanced Community Primary Care, they were outlined in your letter on page 3. And again, that's Exhibit 5, page 3. In that letter, you state it is too soon to say what the return on investment will be. And this is with respect to VBIC. And there's a description there that it's in its 3rd year. There's 4 primary care practices, and there's 7,200 attributed lives across the whole book of business. I want to reference a letter that Blue Cross Blue Shield sent to the board November 30th of 2023. It was in response to our supplemental order from that year. And in that letter, Blue Cross Blue Shield states that VBIC was actually in its 2nd year back then, had 4 primary care practices and served 10,000 attributed lives. And it also stated that a comprehensive evaluation was underway called the VBIC 1.0 report. And that report was due in 2024. So was that VBIC 1.0 evaluation completed?
Yeah, this is, excuse me, this is definitely something that I'll have to take back to Dr. Weigel and follow up on separately. I don't have direct information at the moment about the November 2023 letter, but I'm sure we can have him follow up with the statements here versus the statements that we made in November 2023.
Okay, that would be great. So I guess then I'll ask my questions now, and so that they're in the record, so that Dr. Weigel can follow up on that. And I guess the reason I was asking you of these questions is because you jointly signed that letter with Dr. Weigel. So that's why they're directed to you, even though I recognize that Dr. Weigel probably played a larger role in this aspect of it. But let me just put the questions out there. The enterprise-wide size of the program seems to have shrunk from 10,000 to 7,200 lives. So I would like to understand why, how many of those 7,200 are in QHP. On the actuarial memorandum on page 18, There is a request for an additional $3 per member per month for both the VBIC and the ECPC payment reform program. So there's a request for more money for this VBIC program that seems to have shrunk over time. So I'm trying to understand the justification for a rate increase for a program that has measurably shrunk over time, and understand also the results of that evaluation that was done. The second area that probably also has to go to Dr. Weigel, but it comes from that same letter, it's in reference to the PATH Integrated Pain Program that appears to be in its third year. And in that same May 25th letter that we're talking about here, Exhibit 5, you and Dr. Weigel cite the successes of the program on page 8, noting a 3% decline in medical and pharmaceutical claims combined, a 3% combined reduction in both of those medical and pharmaceutical claims, and a 25% reduction in ED visits. So that's, I think, on page 8, which I want to just reference again, that November 30th letter from 2023 from Blue Cross Blue Shield, that at that time in 2023 stated that the PATH program has resulted in a 17% decrease in medical spend, a 23% decrease in pharmaceutical spend, and a 65% decrease in ED visits for participating members. And in calculating the ROI back then, the cost of the program was equivalent to the fee-for-service claims. In other words, not really much of a positive ROI, but in terms of the cost of the program measured against, these reductions. But those reductions were much more effective back then, much larger than they seem to be now. So again, I'd like to understand if I'm looking at what happened in 2023 and what I'm seeing now in terms of the impact of the program being much smaller, why are you still investing in this program? So again, probably a question for Dr. Weigel, but if you compare the results from 2023 to what was cited in 2025, it looks like the impact is much smaller and the cost back then really didn't offset the claim savings. So I'd like to understand that. Unless you have, is that fair to pivot
Yes.
to Dr. Weigel on that? Okay.
Yeah.
I also, that Exhibit 5 letter cited multiple programs for reducing prescription drug costs, many of them: site of care program, Optum Infusion Specialty Pharmacy, medication management support, Synergy Medication Collective. And I'm wondering if you've reassessed the cost effectiveness of those programs now that there is a 120% cap imposed on hospital administered drugs.
Yeah, the hospital administered or physician administered drugs that are part of the Act 55, that's a very specific area of drug spend. And so we're able to very much do that analysis to understand the impacts. A good example is we did have a site of care program that we wanted to offer members the option to have infusions at home instead of at a facility, and the cost would be reduced. And so that particular program is being reassessed for those savings in light of the Act 55 being passed. We still will often think about, the member experience as well, that even if it's equal costs, if the member experience is better to have the infusion at home, we might move forward with that program. But I just use that one as a familiar example of how the programs, especially on the drug side, are also coordinated to target different areas of high spend. Because the pharmacy trend has been a source of increases over the years, so that's why a lot of the programs are focused in that area.
Yeah, so I guess maybe I would love to see some reevaluation of, sounds like there is some reevaluation of perhaps even the site of care program and whether it's cost effective now that the physician administered drugs are so much lower. So presumably by not necessarily needing to use those programs, there might be some administrative cost savings associated with reductions in some of these programs. So it would be helpful to understand what is the reduction in PM administrative costs for QHP members associated with a downsizing of some of these programs that were designed to reduce prescription drug costs now that Act 55 has been put in place. So where are the cost savings from that on the administrative side? So that'd be helpful to
Board
follow
Member
up on.
Holmes, I hear what you're saying, and we'll follow up on that. But one of the basic requirements of any of these programs is that the savings will more than offset the costs. So, you know, that's an ongoing review process that happens on a cycle. So, but certainly can provide the information that you've requested.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so that's what all I wanted to talk about with the programs. The second lever that you mentioned is the admin costs. And on page 33 of the memorandum, the actuarial memorandum, Blue Cross Blue Shield is using a 5% annual growth trend to project the base admin charges from both 24 to 25 and then again from 25 to 26. So my first question really is, why are administrative costs growing at rates higher than inflation? Inflation's, you know, projected to be 2.5% next year.
Yeah, there's a few reasons. When we are putting together the projection for 2026, it's well in advance of what we can see around that corner. We are very much mindful of some of the disruption in the economy around tariffs and other types of you know, cost and inflation drivers. So that's one thing we were thinking about. The other thing that we're thinking about is on a PM basis, the experience base that we start with is somewhat lower than it might have been had we not been putting such a stop on a lot of the discretionary spend, things that can be put off for a period of time. But at some point, those costs will have to be paid. And so that will have the effect of showing increases in 2026, such that, you know, it's different than what we've seen in the past. So rather than just assuming current inflationary levels will continue into 2026, we tried to take a step back and think about what might we see around the corner in 2026 that would be different. And we saw some pressures on admin costs.
I think what would be helpful for us it would be to understand you were able to reduce discretionary spending this year. And now what you're suggesting is that some of that discretionary spending halt, you may need to increase some of that discretionary spending next year. So can you elaborate on what are the things that you halted this year that you viewed as discretionary that you may not be so discretionary next year?
Yeah, so a way to think about this would be that we can go for a period of time without communicating as much as we do with our members or providers, but at some point we do hold ourselves to a certain threshold of quality to be communicating. We talked about that with Chair Foster's questions. I would speak to travel and training. We have not done anywhere near the amount of training with our staff as we should be doing. We have allowed people who have professional credentials to maintain. Of course, we support that and have maintained investment in that level. We also have, and my point being that in order to, you know, be a good employer and train our people and allow them to develop over time, we need to get back to that. Also in our IT and technology and tools space, we can defer some of the maintenance or defer an upgrade on a particular set of tools for a period of time, but ultimately we have to catch up. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call here that have experienced that you can save money now, but later on, sooner or later, we're going to have to make those investments. So that's a couple of examples of things that will sooner or later have to be spent and brought up to speed.
So you used a lot of language like ultimately and sooner or later and at some point. Is it fair to say that it's not necessarily going to have to be 2026? Sooner or later could be 2027 for some of these expenditures, given the affordability crisis that we have.
Yeah, Blue Cross started limiting our discretionary spend during 2024. Actually, during 2023, our RBC dropped below 400% in 2023. So by the time we get to 26, that's going to be 3 years. And I do think that assuming, a lot of assumptions here, but assuming the recovery begins to show signs that we're on our way, then we will be needing to make those investments in order to make us a more efficient and more effective organization.
Okay, I may have another question about that in a second, but in your May 2025 letter to your chief actuary, I think it's Exhibit 4, in which you asked for the 7% CTR. On page 2, you state, in addition to achieving a 7% CTR, Blue Cross Blue Shield is reducing operating expenses. Can you talk about that and how that is in alignment with 10% between 24 and 26 increase in admin charges?
I think it's entirely consistent. What I'm saying there is that we're in 2025, we have reduced our administrative costs on a volume adjusted basis. Our budget has gone down 7% year over year, but that's really an artificial sort of reduction in the sense that there's required maintenance and things that should be spent, but in the near term, we are doing everything we can to move the needle. So that's what I was referring to there.
Okay. Let me just ask you about one expense that surprised me a bit that seems that was incurred this year. From reading the files, it seems that you paid Milliman, a consulting firm that presumably is not cheap, to calculate the risk-adjusted transfer amount. And I'm curious as to why Blue Cross would pay Milliman to do that when L&E effectively does that for free.
Yeah, it's a great question. So understanding what's coming in the risk adjustment space is one of the most difficult things for our actuaries to figure out. The reason for that is that not only do we have to sort through what our claims and risk adjustment activities are adding up to, but we don't know what the MVP part of that equation is. So when we close the books for the end of any given year, we're really trying to make as best estimate as we can to determine what the risk adjustment change is going to be. And as you know, that's well before the L&E calculation and well before the CMS actual results are known. So because it's been such a difficult area, we've had a lot of upside surprises and in more recent years, a lot of downside surprises on the risk adjustments. So we believe that's an important piece of work, and it's unique. It has to be done by someone outside because it involves the data from both MVP and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. And I don't remember the exact cost of it unless it's in the binder that you're referring to, but it's not expensive by my estimation, and I can dig that number out for you.
Okay, was it accurate?
Well, it's interesting. We've had, we track every year what we learned from that data source relative to our own internal calculations, and it's sometimes more accurate than others. But it is an additional data point that we feel is helpful.
Okay, but how close to accurate was it this year?
I'd have to defer that to Martine. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I know that when the L&E when the L&E estimate came in, the result shifted again. So I know that this particular year we had a lot of information and data points, but not necessarily the data points that ended up being the accurate ones.
Okay. Another administrative expense question. The actuarial memorandum talks about the impact of Act 111 on healthcare costs, and you've talked about, you know, some of the claims edits and work that gets done by your teams. And Act 111 in particular reduced the impact of both internal and outsourced utilization management programs. And you've adjusted upward the QHP rates to account for the higher cost of claims stemming from, you know, restrictions on prior authorizations for internal, utilization reviews, radiology, step therapy, things like that. They're outlined, I believe, in the actuarial memo. Have you also adjusted downward the administrative costs associated with implementing fewer prior authorizations or not paying vendors as much to do utilization reviews? You know, for example, there's a third-party vendor that appears to manage imaging prior auths. That seems like that would be less necessary, or there seems to be less staff time that would be needed for internal utilization review. So is there any adjustment downward in admin costs due to Act 111?
Yeah, we're still in the implementation stages of Act 111. So the costs of actually implementing and figuring out how to make sure the process works correctly is still front and center at the moment. But ultimately, the way we're thinking about it is that any resources that we had internally focused on the PA process, we now have to turn our attention and some of the vendor edit programs. We have to turn our resources to sort of a post-pay, we call it a post-pay review process. And so as Chair Foster mentioned earlier, that we need to be vigilant in making sure that the cost containment is sort of covered off on a consistent basis. And with the going away of with the prior authorizations going away, we still have those resources that are required to do the post-pay reviews and make sure that things are coming through and followed up on if there's something that's not working correctly. So we're seeing it as a sort of a net neutral impact.
Okay. I think I have the same series of questions that Chair Foster did about some of that work. In fact, that post-submission, claim submission kind of work that you're describing. And I think I'm just going to ask for a little bit more information, probably in follow-up, but in that same, Exhibit 5 letter that you wrote on page 2, you stated, under reducing unit costs, you stated, for our largest provider partner, we've spent hundreds of hours modeling unit costs to ensure that such costs are consistent with the party's contract and hospital budget orders. And then on page 9, you talk about limiting fraud, waste, and abuse. And you report how you've removed some providers from your network. And then on page 9 and 10, you also describe how you routinely identify misbilled claims, but only sometimes are you able to recoup those claims costs. And so I guess at some point, it would be helpful for us to be able to understand and quantify to the best of your ability. I know Chair Foster asked this as well, but it would be really helpful for us to understand a quantification of these misbilled claims, where they're coming from, which providers, which facilities are most likely to misbill, what are the billing practices in question that are leading to systemic billing errors that, frankly, your members are paying for. And I really want to understand that. And I think to the degree that you all can help quantify the scale of those, billing errors and fraud, waste, and abuse, or even just departures from party contracts and hospital budget orders, it would be really helpful for us. So just
Yeah,
going to
happy to
echo
follow.
that. It's you know, you've laid it all out here, but there's no way for us to understand the magnitude of that impact.
Yeah. If I may, I'll just comment on the sentence that you picked out that was about the hundreds of hours modeling unit cost. The largest provider just has a very complicated process for implementing rate changes. And so we have to sort through all of that information to understand how it might impact the actual costs once the claims come through the door. And certainly we will follow up on the claims monitoring work that we're doing. What I will just offer up that one of the practical limitations, and it's not a full stop limitation, but it takes resources, is that if there is a question about something that's been billed, a lot of times we end up having to request medical records, and there's a clinical review that's required. And so we get into this exercise of validation and follow-up that oftentimes requires a lot of resources. So I just use that as an example of how you know, the investment in these resources is important, and we're certainly willing to share what some of the outcomes are so that you have a better understanding of that.
Okay. That would be helpful. Really understand that. Just another kind of related question to some of that, some overages. I'd love to understand the basis for the allocation of the $12 million settlement from UVMMC between the ASO market and the reserves market. How did you decide how that money would be distributed?
Sure. So the settlement relates to claims in 22 and 2023. So the settlement is quite a bit lower than what we calculated the overpayments to be. But nonetheless, we took the claims for those 2 years and looked at the membership and client segments that paid those claims. And then we just looked at the proportionate share of those claims and allocated it to where the claims had been paid in 22 and 23 for UVM Medical Center. And then, so some of that went to, you know, the individual and small group segment. Some of it went to each of the ASO clients. We did a further filter of the ASO clients had to still be with us in order to benefit from the settlement. So that was a filter that we put on it, and then finalized the calculations. And so the split, I think in the binder somewhere, I don't know which exhibit it is off the top of my head, but the amount going to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont reserves is 6.9 million of the 12 million. The other amounts are shared among the clients who incurred those claims in 22 and 23. So they on a proportional basis received payments for the balance of that money.
Okay. And I think my last just question involves, can you tell me what the annual legal or other administrative expenses that have been incurred since 2022 associated with the Michigan affiliation? So I know it happened in 23, but I'm assuming there was prep work in 22 to decide that that was a good idea. So I'm wondering if you can just, what are the administrative expenses related to that Michigan affiliation annually, 22, 23, 24, you know, how much resources are devoted to that? You can follow up with that. That's fine.
Yeah, I'll have to take that one.
Okay, that's great. And then I think related to that, what annual savings have you booked from that affiliation? I guess I'm guessing 23 was the year that it happened. So let's say 24. And then what do you anticipate in terms of annual savings for 25 and then 26 related to being affiliated with Michigan?
Yeah, the savings, I think we've outlined in the actuarial memorandum in terms of expense, operating expense savings. Right away after the affiliation, we were able to see lower costs on some of our technology as a result of the contracts. Michigan has a much bigger contract membership, so they get better rates. So the NASCO platform in particular, I think is saving us well over $1 million a year annually as a result of that. And that is incorporated in the base, that started in 2024. So our premium rates have benefited from those savings. We also have other contracts that we've been able to renegotiate at renewal at lower costs. And that is making up another amount of money. I think it's on the order of about $2 million a year so far. We're working on other areas of opportunity there. And then the other big place of savings so far is on the pharmacy PBM contract renewal. We've been able to, through the negotiating power of Michigan, improve the terms significantly on the PBM. And those terms do flow through to the premium rates as they happen. So to the extent that the terms are improved in 2025, those come through and will continue to benefit the pharmacy trend.
And how do those savings compare to what was projected at the time of the affiliation?
Yeah, the first category on the vendor contract savings and the PBM savings are either consistent with our original estimates or better than our original estimates. The one area that we're lagging behind on at this point is some of the technology improvements. And part of that is due to us being in a place where we're very much, as you know, in a financial situation where it's all hands on deck to do the recovery plan. So we have not been able to progress some of the technology changes that we foresee. Also, Michigan has also, like a lot of other large Blue plans around the country, has run into their own financial challenges. So we're delayed on where we originally thought we'd be on the technology shifts. But when we put that plan together, we did not realize the difficulties that Vermont would run into, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont would run into in 2024. We still have that on the drawing board, and we're still optimistic that one of the key pillars of the affiliation was to help a small local Blue plan like ourselves access technology in a cost-effective way. And we've been able to do that on the contracting side, which is low-hanging fruit. But ultimately, we're looking to be able to take advantage of the scale that Michigan brings. And then I would like to just point out that the affiliation value has, it was not part of our original drawing board on affiliation value, but clearly as Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont has been navigating this very difficult financial headwinds, Michigan has been very helpful in terms of both. The obvious one we've already talked about is the surplus loan to help us stay above regulatory action level at the end of 2024. But they've also been able to create a cash facility that we previously had with a regional bank that was increasing the costs of that cash facility given our financial challenges. So we were able to take advantage of that. And then another good example is we did, as part of the financial recovery plan, look at some opportunities to reinsure, quota share reinsure some of our risks. And Michigan has a lot of expertise in-house in doing that. And we were able to explore a couple of alternatives there. But in the end, they turned out to be very expensive alternatives. It's sort of like when you need the reinsurance and you're already in a situation where things are very challenging, the price of that reinsurance sort of goes up and up and up and becomes prohibitive. But being able to explore that option and understand exactly what our options were in that space was largely facilitated by the expertise from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. So those are just good examples of things where both planned and unplanned benefits from the affiliation.
Okay, I think it's just my last question about that affiliation. There was a response to the HCA questions related to the affiliation. I think it was question 10, where Blue Cross Blue Shield states that some actions that were previously with the board of directors of Blue Cross Blue Shield Authority are now subject to Michigan approval. So I'm just curious, what are the actions that now have to be subject to the Michigan approval that were not before, obviously?
Yeah, I believe that was referring to, and if you know the exhibit and page number, I can speak to it directly, but I believe that's just the reality that Michigan, as a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, now is the sole member that owns the licensing in Vermont that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont operates under. So from that perspective, they do control the decision-making at the highest level. In a practical sense, the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont board itself is still making decisions much like they had been making it before the affiliation. I don't know if that speaks to your.
Well, I'm just wondering what the
question.
some actions are now subject to approval. So for example, is executive compensation determined by the, Vermont board now subject to the approval of the Michigan, parent? I'm trying to understand what are the actual, what gets shifted up the pipeline to be approved?
Yes, from my experience and being attending the Vermont Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont board meetings, the decision-making criteria hasn't changed a lot. There are Michigan executives on the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont board, so all the action happens there. But I will follow up specifically on what the some actions refers to, so that you have a very specific answer to your question.
That would be helpful. That's great. And I think I'm just looking at my questions. Just one final one that I must have missed here. The 70% fixed cost, 30% variable costs. How does that benchmark against similarly sized peers in terms of your costs structure?
Yeah, we haven't invested the resources recently in a benchmark, but back several years ago when we did do benchmarks, I think for a small blue plan, it's very common to have a high percentage of fixed costs versus variable. I don't recall, as I sit here today, what that percentage is, but it was not inconsistent with the same size plans.
Great. If you have that, even that slightly outdated benchmarking study, it would be interesting to see. So if you could follow up with that, that'd be great. I think that is all I have. Mr. Barber, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Green.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we should take 5 minutes, come back and finish up board questions. So see everyone back here slightly after 11:30.